Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to another God of War video. With us still rounding out the remaining members of Odin's bloodline, I thought that in today's History of episode, we could touch on the youngest member of the Aesir bloodline, the daughter of Thor, and a Valkyrie in training, Thrud. Now, Thrud herself is a very interesting character in Ragnarok. Being a descendant of two iconic gods in their history, Thor and Odin, naturally, Thrud had unbelievably big shoes to fill, especially with her half-brothers, Magni and Modi, having perished in combat. So her ambitions of rising to glory is something to be admired, even if she's discouraged by her own mother. But even so, why is this the case? Why is there so much pushback from her parents, despite even Odin seeing potential in her? Well, today, we will be exploring what goes on behind the scenes in the walls of Asgard, her uneasy relationship with her family, and what may become of Thru coming out of Ragnarok. But before we do so, here is a quick reminder, as always everyone, that if possible, I would of course super appreciate it if we could first get this video to about 1,000 likes. Again, it's a small thing, mind you, but trust me when I say it really does go a long way here. And if you like what we do here and wish to see more God of War content, please don't forget to subscribe, as well as tick that bell. But without any further ado, let's get on to the video, shall we? Now, as mentioned at the start, Thrud herself is from an ancient and very prestigious bloodline. Having ties to the Allfather meant that the blood of ancients flowed through her veins, with her ancestors being Ymir, the very first giant, and Andambla, the primordial cow. Being a child of Thor and Sif, a warrior god and one of harvest, had it so expectations were high, especially seeing as she did have competition that's coming in the form of her two older half-brothers, Magni and Modi. The duo were more or less joined at the hip, as they constantly seeked for their father's approval as to who would inherit Mjolnir. Whilst we do not have every detail of Thrud's earlier life, we do know enough about it to somewhat paint a picture of how she grew up, as it does help show the significant differences between herself and Magni and Modi. As you see, before Thrud's birth, Thor and Sif were known to be quite careless in how they raised Magni and Modi, putting themselves forward with the luxuries of dining and mead, opposed to prioritizing raising the two boys. But do not get it twisted, as whilst they most certainly loved the two, their way of showing their affection was through arduous training and brutal beatings. In their eyes, this was a way to truly embody the Aesir fighting spirit. But in reality, all this in fact did was brew a fierce rivalry between the two, as they constantly bickered and competed for their father's favor. But all of this changed when Sif gave birth to Thru, with her mother having abandoned drink and instead choosing to nurture and raise her in a completely different manner. Whilst again, not too much is verbally disclosed, as it's simply more implied than anything. It does look like both Thor and Sif were not too pleased with how Magni and Modi turned out, and even amongst the Aesir, the two were seen as a nuisance. Thus, Sif was far more careful with how she raised her daughter. But of course, being raised in a warrior bloodline, Thrud's interest in combat was always there, only halted in place by Sif. But in many other ways, all this actually did was further push her interests, especially after one day when she gazed upon the Valkyries, absolutely mesmerized by the beauty in their brutality. Thrud would then go on to promise to herself that one day she would join their ranks, idolizing one of the most famous amongst them, Sigrun. Naturally, the rift between Sif and Thrud only continued to widen, with Thrud going behind her mother's back and training whenever she wasn't looking. And to no one's surprise, this is where Odin seeps into the fold. sensing the division between the two, much like his own children, Odin bears an interest in what Thrud can provide to his own ranks. So, the Allfather would strongly encourage her to follow her ambitions, even if it meant defying her own parents' will. So, because of Sif's lack of support, Thrud would begin to idolize her grandfather, seeking to gain his approval, much like her half-brothers did with Thor. But of course, little did she actually know just how sinister Odin truly was. But things all changed as Fimbulwinter began to set in, as the Odinsons suffered a huge loss with the death of Magni, as he would be sent on a tracking mission with Balder and Modi to finish off a lost giant. With the death of Magni, the terrified Modi returned back to Asgard in defeat, and much to the outrage of Thor, before beating his son into a broken mess. So much so that he was forced to escape to Midgard, where he himself would later die to a young half-giant by the name of Atreus. Following these events, the family would suffer yet another loss, this time in the form of Balder, and Balder's demise meant that Fimbulwinter had begun, and Ragnarok was on the horizon. Now, behind closed doors, the death of Magni and Modi sparked a huge change in Thor. Having seen the errors of his actions, much like Sif, Thor would decide to stop drinking, wanting to focus and put in more time to be a better dad for Thru, even privately training her behind Sif's back. Whilst Thrud couldn't entirely say she had the best relationship with Magni and Modi, she did most certainly feel their loss. Now, during the course of Ragnarok, once Atreus accepts Odin's invite to Asgard, here, the daughter of the Thunderer decides to play a prank on the young and naive Atreus, where upon opening his door, he is held at sword point as she proclaims sweet vengeance for her brothers. But of course, she would then drop the act, showing no ill will towards Atreus, and remarks that she understands their circumstances, not holding any bad blood towards him, and even showing empathy for her older brothers, remarking that things are better this way. So, with pleasantries aside, Thrud does give Atreus a brief tour of the Grand Hall, where she begins talking about her ambitions of becoming a Valkyrie, and much to her surprise, learning how Atreus has in fact encountered a few of them. Soon after this, she does guide Atreus to Odin's Keep to go on a mission with Thor. The next time we encounter Thru is after Atreus has managed to retrieve a fragment of an ancient mask that Odin has had great interest in. Here, she has simply been sent out to acquire the young giant, also awkwardly shaking off Skilda, who is very obviously crushing on her. Now, after Atreus is done with Odin, Thrud can be heard having an argument with Sif, as her mother is understandably worried for her safety, especially around the likes of Atreus. But Thrud does not quite see it that way, as she believes her mother as simply being disapproval of serving the Allfather. Now, later on, after Atreus has gained some moderately good faith with Odin, he would then be dispatched to Helheim with the likes of Heimdall and Thru, with it actually being the first time she has come outside of Asgard's walls. And understandably, she is as excited as she is hesitant, as this is an incredible opportunity to prove her worth to the Allfather. But as Heimdall does leave, Atreus attempts to convince Thru that the grandfather she idolizes so much isn't quite the great god she proclaims him to be, recounting the awful atrocities against his people. But understandably, Thrud does not take kind to these words, retorting that he's either a hypocrite or a liar for still helping them. The two continue to bicker as they search for the mask, and this quest is stopped when they come across the hellhound Garm. Locked away, Atreus is able to convince Thru to help him free the wolf, believing that the mask is behind him. But as Garm is freed, the mask fragment Atreus has suddenly goes silent, meaning that their efforts were for nothing. Realizing the terrible mistake they've made, Thrud rushes back home to Asgard, as Garm begins to create realm tears across reality. But as they rendezvous to return, the two would be met by the cunning Heimdall, preying on their loss and failure, even picking a fight with Thrud as he holds them both accountable for this gigantic mess up, prying away at Thor's alcoholism and her failed dreams. Understandably, things have been heated since her arrival in Helheim, so a fight spills out between the two, with Thrud unfortunately unable to land a strike on Heimdall, being easily outmatched. Once Thrud returns back to Asgard, she is heartbroken, as this was her opportunity to prove herself. So she returns back to her room, angry at Atreus and herself for not being able to prove her worth. Later on, when her temper subsides, Atreus would come knocking on her door, seeking to find her father, unable to find him in the confines of their home. And this is where Thru comes to the horrible realization that the only other place Thor could be was the Grand Tavern. Upon entering it, she is crushed to see her father has relapsed into old habits, ones that lie at the bottom of a barrel of mead. Thrud tries to sympathize with her father, wanting him to not break his promise. But Thor is drunk beyond reasoning, succumbing to his own sorrows, and even causing a bar brawl with the Inhydea. Eventually, as this battle closes out, and Thor is knocked off his feet drunk, Thrud and Atreus are forced to take him outside, having him regain his senses. And it's here where he realizes how badly he has failed her. So much so that he can't even bear to look her in the eye. And as much as Thrud scolds him, she does have him understand that he isn't alone, that she and Sif were always going to be there for him, even if the Allfather wasn't. And these words do seem to resonate with Thor, as he does apologize to her before recomposing himself and escorting Atreus to Niflheim. But what follows is something Thrud didn't expect, as the next time we see her is during the siege of Ragnarok, where she's defending the walls of Asgard from any that would dare destroy her home. And much to her surprise, she would cross paths with Atreus, understandably pissed that he quite literally brought war to her doorstep. But at knife point, Atreus once again does try to sway her from Odin's side, having her come to understand just how ruthless he is, lining the walls of Asgard with Midgardians to slow them down. But her devoted following to the Allfather isn't quite so easily crumbled, that is, until Sif appears. She explains to Thru that the words Atreus speaks are indeed true, as she shows her the injured Skjolder, explaining that the true nature of Odin isn't unionship, but instead that of selfishness, a personal strive for one's own preservation. And Sif even admits that the reason she disapproves of her Valkyrie training wasn't that she hated the idea of it, but that Odin would merely see her as a puppet. So whilst hesitant, Thrud does put her faith in her mother's judgment, aligning herself with Kratos and even Atreus in the hopes of stopping her father as well as Odin, not wanting things to spiral out of hand. But as she guides the two to their keep, Kratos would be attacked by Thor, with him seeing her so close to the enemy. Luckily, Kratos is able to de-escalate this fight, but tragically, Thrud bears witness to something that truly shatters her heart: the death of her father at the hands of Odin, so Thru can finally see the monster she has heard so much of, even reaching out to Thor as he fades into the ether. And to no one's surprise, the silver-tongued snake even tries to lie about what she just saw. But now knowing the truth, Thrud attempts to reach out to Mjolnir to attack the Allfather. But Odin is one step ahead, grabbing the hammer himself and sending her out the battlefield. Thrud is then next, finally seen in the post-game, following the defeat of the Allfather. Here, she and Sif understandably mourn the loss of Thor. Whilst he was far from perfect, it seems that in the end, in Thrud's eyes, he had redeemed himself, actively trying to define the very weapon his father had shaped him into. Now, Thrud's last and final appearance is when she travels to Helheim. She can be seen contemplating whether or not she is truly worthy of wielding a weapon like Mjolnir, but wanting to honor her father's change and alter the legacy of the hammer. Thrud becomes the new wielder of Mjolnir, seeking to forge her own future alongside the Shield Maidens, with Sigrun being her teacher. Now, Thrud is a beautifully complex character, helping not only add an additional layer of depth to the Odinson family dynamic, but going to show what blind faith and trust can do to a person, especially when it comes from one that seeks to prey on the desperate, the ones that are lost. Again, it actually does help add to the villainous nature of Odin, with not even his children's children being safe from his grasp. I'm glad that by the end of it all, Thrud was finally able to see that monster for what he truly was. A crazed old madman engulfed by a selfish obsession for knowledge. With that said, everyone, this has been it for the history of Thrud. And I must say, she was a pleasant addition to Ragnarok. Her dynamic with the rest of the cast added so many layers to the Odinson household, from her estranged relationship with Sif, to her disconnect with her father, and blind devotion to Odin. It helps paint a picture of what exactly happened between the last game and Ragnarok itself. Plus, it's actually very rare that Thrud gets any exposure at all, as it's typically Magni and Modi that is destined to inherit Mjolnir. So this was a great pedestal to put this character on display that many, including myself, did not know of for the longest time. And now, with Thrud going on to train as a Valkyrie, with Mjolnir in hand, I can't wait to see the possibilities that do lie ahead of this character. So, here's hoping that we do get to revisit her at some point, as I would love to know what becomes of her destiny. With that said, everyone, what did you think of Thru? What was your favorite moment with the character? Please do comment down below. But for now, everyone, this has been it for me. So as always, stay strong, stay well, and keep on fighting, as Ragnarok is finally here. Take care, everyone. I'll see you soon.